Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I am joined by Michael Fairbanks, aka the King of Burbank, as we review Dune Part 2. Following up Denis Villeneuve's first film from 2021, Dune Part 2 is an expansion in pretty much every way from the first film. It has been widely regarded as the first truly great film of 2024, and today we debate if that claim is true and look towards the future to see where this franchise might be going. As always, if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. There are new episodes every other week and bonus episodes on our Patreon. You can get video episodes on YouTube or audio episodes wherever your favorite podcasts are found. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get to our review of Dune Part 2.
It's okay. I'm here. It's been a while since you've had one of those nightmares. Tell me, what was it about?
It's only fragments. Nothing's clear.
Okay, and I think before we get into Dune 2, Dune Part 2. I don't want to, I want to get the name correct. The 21st highest rated film on Letterboxd, don't want to disparage it. I do want to quickly just get a temperature check on where we were with the first film. It feels like it was so long ago, back when every movie was going to HBO Max on the same day. Very strange time. Michael, what were your initial thoughts on the first Dune? Just very quickly as a temperature check.
So I really struggled with that movie. I had such a hard time getting into it, and I think it's for a couple reasons. The first is that I saw it at a very small mall theater because it was 2021, the pandemic was still raging, Omicron was coming around the corner, so I wasn't exactly stoked to sit in a giant IMAX theater and catch COVID. So I saw it in a smaller room. So the visual impact of it didn't really hit me. And the other reason I don't think it worked is because I just don't think it's that good. I recently rewatched it and enjoyed it a little bit more than I did on the first viewing, but I still find it to just be kind of a portentous, muddled movie that is just trying to introduce a lot of things and kind of roll through a lot of exposition, but doesn't have anything really in the way of compelling character development or emotion, or even, I would say, good performances. I find a lot of it to be very stilted and I almost compare it to Phantom Menace in the aspect that it gets very caught in the weeds of the politics of everything and just how everything works, and it kind of forgets to be a movie, in my opinion. So I don't like it that much. And I really kind of was baffled when it was a decent hit for the time, because I thought, honestly, as far as Denis goes, Blade Runner was more accessible to me as a viewer and much more compelling in that aspect than Dune. And I was really, I was happy that it was a hit just because it wasn't a superhero movie, but I was kind of perplexed by the success of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. I was very mixed. I'll admit, when I first went to my screening, they had a bunch of teenagers there for some reason who Dune is a slow movie of political drama. They were on their phones taking pictures of the screen, laughing, openly talking. It was the worst screening experience. And you know me, I'm a little bitch, so I was like, this is unacceptable. This is supposed to be an early screening for critics. How dare they? So I was just it was fine. I was I feel like I was taken out of the movie, but overall decent enough. Watched it on HBO Max after, and I was like, yeah, it's good. I like the first Dune. I don't think it's spectacular. I think it helps that I know the story. I've read some of the book. I've seen the David Lynch version. I like the David Lynch version, not to open up a can of worms. But I was okay, it was good. And then I rewatched it recently before Dune Part 2. And I was I'm definitely more mixed on it now than I was back in 2021, where I was this really hinges for me on what the next part is, because there really isn't, as you mentioned, it's not really a movie even. It really is the setup. It's chapter 1 of a story, and you need to have chapter 2 in order to stick the landing, because they don't even really try to. The plane is still in the air as Dune Part 1 ends. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go into Dune Part 2, and hopefully it's just going to stick the landing and be great. And I'll admit, I'm more mixed even on Part 2 than I was Part 1. I know you have a very different reaction, so I'm excited to hear what you think. But just starting very quickly, I will say, like, sitting there in Dolby Cinema, and I was like, worried I was gonna like fall asleep during this movie, genuinely, because it was very late. I get why they put the screening in Dolby Cinema, considering it about every 5 seconds literally physically shakes you. It's so loud with its sound. But like all the action really dug. I think from like a cinematic perspective. On the big screen, you're going to go to this movie. You're going to have tons of fun. When it swells, especially that third act, it's really hard not to walk away from this film like, hell yeah, that was fucking awesome. The writing for me and the plot development was definitely where it was a little bit more mixed. A lot more talking to dead, or not dead, but unborn fetus than I thought we were going to get, I'll admit. I think the politics are somewhat weird. We'll probably get into it. But just as an opening thought, like the action, the story itself was not quite what I was looking forward to. I don't think I could sit through this again, but that's me. What are your opening thoughts on Dune Part 2?
I was actually really kind of shocked by what an improvement I thought it was over the first one. Really, I thought above everything that Denis actually really took into account the criticisms of the first one. It's much less stoic. It has way more heart. It has way more humor. It's romantic. It has, like you mentioned, it has the great set pieces. It is pretty beautifully acted, and it's gorgeous. I saw it in IMAX this time around, and that definitely did make a difference because you really do take in kind of the vastness of Greg Fraser's cinematography and how he captures Arrakis and how just like big it looks. The scale of everything. Like even when I was watching the first Dune again on my TV the other day, I really did think to myself, like, okay, so much of the appeal of this is just how giant everything looks. And you're almost like an ant, like watching this conflict unfold. And I did really find that in part two that I cared a little more. I do agree with you that I think that it's not necessarily the most beautifully written movie. And I also think that a lot of the pre-release hype is just, or not pre-release, I would say a lot of the kind of early reactions, that's what I meant, are just insane. There are people saying this thing is as good as Lord of the Rings, it's as good as Star Wars. And that's where I sort of fall off because while I think it's a tremendously executed movie and I think it's very good in its own right, I don't care in the same way that I do in those other movies where I feel like the characters are so lovable and you go on such a journey with them. And I understand that Dune, just as a story, is a darker, more kind of morally ambiguous tale. But I do think that I still feel a layer of disconnection from really all of it. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the way Denis directs. He's just not necessarily the kind of director that really is focused on making you fall in love with the characters. And for me, that makes it into something that's a great spectacle movie that I enjoyed tremendously. But I do agree with you that I wouldn't necessarily rush to watch it again. Like, there are all these people who are like, I saw on Twitter just now, somebody who was like, round 7. I'm like, how do you still have ears? Because, like, 2 hours, you're 2 hours and 20 minutes into this thing. There's a whole climax to go. My ears are throbbing and ringing. I thought I was going to go deaf in there. Like, there's also like an element of it to where I think, and I'm going to sound like such a boomer by saying this, there's such a like fixation on modern movies of just having just like extreme sensory overload. And I think stylistically, these movies are very guilty of that, to where they just like a lot of the time they are beautiful, and a lot of the time they're just very loud and very busy. This one, I would say less so than the first one in terms of being visually busy, but in terms of just a lot of the time the soundscape just being noise, I really felt that. But overall, I was actually really impressed with it. I walked away excited for the third one. Whereas after I saw the first one, I'm like, I don't even know if I can sit through the second one.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned how like the busyness because the film I would relate is to the most is from last year. I would say this is similar to Across the Spider Verse. Not only are these both number in the 20s as far as again the Letterboxd top 250 films of all time, which I don't know how you get there with either one, but both ones are like very cinematic spectacles that you can go and like lose yourself in the animation of Spider Verse. You can go lose yourself on the fucking worms in Dune 2, which is like awesome set pieces. I'll say Dune 2, I'm definitely way higher on than Across the Spider Verse. But both times I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, is this story really? And both like there's a lot of weird parallels. Both are second parts of clearly three acts or three movie structures. Both end very strangely, I think, with that. I think Dune Part 2 does a better job wrapping up at a point where it feels like, oh, we've had something to feel satisfied with. But like, dude, Denis, like each time Dune has lied and been like, this is the end. They did not advertise Dune as Dune Part 1 when it premiered. It was like a drop on everyone. Guess what? You're not even going to get like a real end. Here, they're doing another cliffhanger. I was like, oh, come on, dude. But I think in both films, I just keep coming back to like, what am I actually like watching? What is the story? Am I interested? And I think in Dune Part 2, the prophecy is such like a strange narrative device. It clearly wants to have this conversation around like Western religion being put onto indigenous groups. And like that's an interesting angle to have. You have some who view it as being a way to control the indigenous populations. That again is a very worthwhile conversation. But then you kind of look at like how is it motivating the characters? How is it motivating the narrative? How are we, the audience, supposed to interact with this prophecy that was set up in part one? We have reason to believe it's like real. So then the whole conversation around it being like just propaganda doesn't really work. And also like it just like it gets so lost in it where I'm like, the writing is so bad, truly, and that's why I think like it's just like it loses me so much until it's the big dumb moments where like, yes, I will admit riding on a sandworm through this desert is awesome. When they bust through the sand dune, I'm sitting there cheering in the theater also. Not really, I'm not Soups. I would not do that. But it's just like I don't know, the rest of the movie. And it's like also like 2.5 hours long, right? So like at some point, yes, like I can go deaf hearing these fun action sequences and going through them. But like, I don't know. If this was a 90-minute film, maybe it would be better for me. But I just get bored. And I also think the performances, you mentioned the performances. I think it's such a mixed bag where I think Timmy does a good job. Shout out Timmy. Everyone liked you in Wonka. I didn't, but I think you're good here. Zendaya's good. Rebecca Ferguson's good. I think like Austin Butler's terrible. There are genuine moments, and I cannot believe more people are not mentioning this, where you hear Elvis. I've never like, um, he obviously is very open to like, oh, I've been like trapped in an Elvis voice, and it's been like, oh, that's silly, goofy. There are times when he's like yelling that he just sounds like Elvis Presley, and I'm like, oh, it's like actually still in him. That's like he's possessed. Very similar to Bradley Cooper and Maestro. Where he just got possessed apparently and talked to his ghost and became best friends with the
The
ghost.
ghost came inside him.
Yeah,
That's what happened. Come on now.
and he misses him dearly every day. But like I think Butler's bad. I think Javier Bardem is like awful. I mean, you mentioned the comedy. There are some moments of comedy that works. His like buffoonery of like, oh my god, it's all part of the prophecy. I was like, oh god, this sucks. It's just I don't know. It's such a mixed bag for me. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the performances?
I the thing about the both of these movies, but this one I think really brought it out, is that I think the lore of Dune, at least in the movies, I have no way to speak on the book whatsoever, is just really dull. I just don't care. It's just all these different terms and all this like kind of mumbo jumbo, and it's just very rigid and stoic, and I just don't care. I do think, like I mentioned before, the characters in this really shined, and they put more focus on that this time around. And because of that, I really did get into the performances. I thought Timmy was excellent. Um, I would say that I'm mixed on Timmy as a whole. I think sometimes he's great, and I think sometimes he's a little miscast. I thought he was dreadfully miscast in the first Dune. I was really not into that performance at all. But I thought this time around he brought a lot more of his own personality to Paul. He sort of made him feel a lot more human, a lot warmer, a lot funnier. and then ultimately in the end menacing. I was actually really surprised by how imposing he was once we're doing spoilers, right?
Yeah, you can go ahead with spoilers. Have you
Once
seen The King, by the way?
I have, he was good in that, I
Okay.
thought. Um,
Yeah.
once the prophecy is fulfilled and he starts going down the darker route, I was really surprised by how imposing he was and how commanding he was. Zendaya, I think, gave the best performance of everyone. I think the biggest aid this movie had is that the first one did not have Zendaya, but here I thought their love story was terrific. Their chemistry was really affable, and I really kind of got into their dynamic. Like one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Paul is wandering through the desert because they're testing him, and Chani meets up with him, and they just have that kind of cute moment where they're like practicing the worm walk together. Just a lot of great moments like that between the two of them, and then at the end, um, Zendaya just has that wrenching moment when Paul decides that he's going to marry Rulian, and there's a cut to her face, and just the way she like plays the just like visceral disgust without saying a word. I just thought that was unbelievably impressive. She's a star. There's no question in my mind. I like Austin. I thought he was having a lot of fun. I just generally like him, and I just really enjoy his commitment to his acting, I would say it, and I think he really kind of goes for broke every time. I think the character is very thin, and kind of the realization of it felt like they were sort of going for a Heath Ledger Joker vibe of just like, oh, this guy is so unpredictable and crazy, and in every scene he's gonna do something fucked up. And like beyond that, though, we never really know him. We don't really understand what his motivations are. We don't really know what he cares about beyond just being evil. But I don't think that's Austin Butler's fault. I think that's just squeezing this story into such a compact medium.
It is strange
Um,
that he's not in the first film, I felt. I mean, I know, like, obviously they're adapting the books, so they're going to go with what that is. But, like, as a small adjustment, and it's really weird that they built up Batista in the first film, be like such a villain. And then here they're just like, he's still there, but they're like, actually, step to the side. We want a new bad guy. And it's like, well, if you just put him in the first film, it would have been built
yeah,
better to be a
I think
predictable
as a
villain.
whole, the baddies are really weak. Like Austin is my favorite just because I think he has the most personality. But like Christopher Walken, Stellan Skarsgård, Austin Butler, these could all be the same character to me. There's nothing really delineating them from one another. And I don't think the movie even really tries to do that. And I assume in the book, you learn a lot more about the Harkonnens and what they're like and why they are the way they are. But in this, they're just like, they're genocidal and evil, and that's about it. Batista, yeah, he was a clown in this. I like him a lot. I think he's tremendous. His performance in Knock at the Cabin was one of my favorites of last year. In this, he was just yelling. The person who I thought was the worst, and I hate to say this because she's one of my favorites, is Florence Pugh as Princess Aurelian. Now, to her credit, she's in the movie for 5 minutes. You don't really understand who this character is, what her place in the story is going to be, why she's even there, and neither did she, because she delivers all of her lines like she's just utterly perplexed by what she's saying. I at no point felt like, and I'm not like calling her dumb or anything, because like she's obviously a very smart, talented woman. But at every juncture, I felt like she had no idea what she was saying, what it meant, like what her motivation was. It was just like you could tell, and like from some of the interviews I've read with her about it, she was like, "Oh, Denis offered me this role, and I really wanted to watch him direct, so I just kind of showed up and did it." And you could tell.
I mean, not to peel back the curtain, I have it on good authority that in the first, like, there was a lot more Florence Pugh at one point in this film, and then it got edited down, and apparently what was cut was not very good.
Uh huh.
Um, so a little bit of a weird choice. I assume in the third film, Dune Messiah, I'll just call it, like, we probably will get more of her, but I agree she was definitely a little lost here. And definitely like specifically edited to be a little bit more of an afterthought than I think she probably originally was going to be, which is sad because, again, I also love her so much, but that's
Yeah.
life, you know?
No, definitely. I do think that some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier, some of the like colonialism themes and stuff like that, I do think they handled it well. And I do think that, and I want to be careful how I address this. I do think right now a story like this could be very helpful or very harmful given everything going on in the world. The way that Paul views the Fremen, you understand that he views them as a means to an end, and that he only truly cares about Chani, and that the rest of them he only kind of cares about as a way to get to the Emperor. And I just think that the whole way the story is unfolding, I do think that they're not mincing words, so to speak, about the harm that this man is going to cause, and the fact that he's not a hero, and the fact that the prophecy is actually a harmful thing, and the way that people can kind of fall into false deities and everything. Is it a little shallow? Maybe. But I think I would rather have something be a little shallow and have a more broad reach for more people to understand than be esoteric and inaccessible and have 5 people with letterboxd accounts get it. And by that same token, I actually liked all the Javier Bardem stuff. It was definitely a little bit like the Javier comedy hour at times. Like I thought it was a little, there were little moments where I thought like, okay, we didn't need that joke there. But for the most part, I thought he was vital in kind of showing how these people fall into this kind of cult mentality. And I thought he did a great job of kind of playing it utterly sincerely, but also adding a lot of really kind of funny moments.
I guess to push back a bit and like not we don't need to launch into a full debate, and I do think it's like a little complex. I don't think it's like a disaster or anything. I think my concerns come from like ultimately, yes, they do talk about how this prophecy will bring bloodshed. And we're still seeing it play out in Dune Messiah. I'm sure we'll go deeper into the consequences. But from just the context of this film, well, yes, they admit like people will die. It does ultimately feel justified as like a means to a better end and like the theoretical liberation of these people. And we're taking out these bad guys who are evil for all sides. It does feel a little bit too, for me, like we're ultimately validating Paul's side and what Paul is thinking for the greater good. I just think it's messy. I mean, like, I don't think it's a disaster again. And again, we don't need to launch into a full scale like debate about this, but like, I just, for me, it was just a little too messy, but I agree. Like, I'm happy that they are touching on these things in a way that doesn't feel very esoteric or vague. And I don't really need to like read all these think pieces on like, what is it actually trying to say? And is it in there? Like, I do think it's digestible enough to where like the general public will get a good takeaway from it. I just think if we're breaking it down deeper, for me, I find issues, but I wouldn't push back per se on anyone who didn't see that. It's definitely one of those where it's like just up to personal take. Um,
I
so
think
that's
the
just
thing
me.
that makes it work is the very end, because they sort of I'm losing the like lore name for it, but they like talk about, oh, the other colonies or the other planets or whatever they say are already opposed to Paul rising to power. And he
Yeah,
just kind of goes like, I don't know, fuck it, we're gonna kill him. And then
that's true.
the final scene of the movie is Zendaya pretty much walking away and going like, I would rather jump into the mouth of a worm than follow this fucker. And I think that makes it, I think that does put a pretty definitive period on it leading
Sure.
into Messiah. I definitely see what you're saying, because Paul is so sympathetic throughout the movie until he drinks the worm piss and goes like nuclear evil. But I do think the message is clearly expressed, especially
Sure.
in the final minutes.
Valid. I will say I like the worm piss. And other than them killing the baby worm, which did make me sad, I think the world building as far as like the iconography and everything like on planet, I thought was very strong. Like I'll say that's the most engaged I was. I like learning about these cultures, the differences between the North and the South. I do think it's kind of weird. They were like, no one can possibly survive in the South. It's evil, or it's like it's awful. And you go there and it just like feels like the North. And I was like, well, I feel like you could have done a little bit more to show why people would feel this way. But I did like again the production design and costume design. I think both were nominated at the Oscars the first time around. Would not be mad if they were again. I thought everything was very well done. Visual effects also. A lot of movies look bad anymore with visual effects. Dune looks pretty good. I think there are some scenes where it looks a little iffy, but like overwhelmingly, pretty good stuff there.
I would say the main thing that does for me fall in line with like the Lord of the Rings comparisons and stuff like that is the level of just like sheer craftsmanship that goes into everything you're looking at. And I do think that it is definitely the same level of innovation with like visual effects and all of that as that series. Nothing really looked dodgy to me, to be honest. And even in the first Dune, there are a couple scenes that I don't think look good at all. Like there's that the bit where the Harkonnens take over House Atreides and they kill Oscar Isaac's character, and it's just this like dark, muddy looking, just like all you can see is the fire and like the scattered shadows of the soldiers, and it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like you're really watching anything. And there's a lot of scenes, especially in the third act of the first Dune, that I think have that issue. This one I thought just had way more clarity. It had way more sweep to the action sequences. They felt bigger, they felt more epic, they felt more emotional, and they had more distinguishing them. Like I think honestly, my favorite visual moment in the entire movie is at the very beginning. And it's when the Harkonnen bounty hunters are like floating up the side of that mountain. That shit was so sick. And it really like established this vibe of like thick, atmospheric, beautiful visual action that isn't just like boom, slam, pow. It's like about the imagery and how these things move and fall and whatnot. And I thought that was a strong statement, but almost too promising. I was like, is there anything that's going to live up to this? And there was a lot that did, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the action here is like second to none. Even as someone who's pretty bored by most action sequences, I think there's some really good ones in like John Wick, for example. Though I do think it's a little, it's not a review for John Wick, but the individual sequences, taking out of context, let's say, I think are pretty good. I do think this probably is one of the better action epics when it comes to action that we've seen in recent memory. One thing you mentioned is I will say, and I don't know if this is like a complaint. It does feel pretty disjointed in a lot of ways from the first film watching these back to back. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of the visuals are better. I think a lot of the energy and movement are way better. But I do think you would get whiplash watching like the first film, which is really cold, really drawn out, rather slow. Into like this film, it does feel like two completely different films, which again is not a problem per se, but like overall, I do think if you're watching the series, that is the one note I feel like I would make on a rewatch is just like it feels very different. It
I
is what
watched
it
them on
is.
the same day. Um, I revisited them both on the same day, and I think that it transitions in pretty organically. I just think that I don't think it's so much that they feel tonally disjointed. I just think that you can tell that they weren't filmed concurrently like Lord of the Rings, because it's like not exactly the same vibe. You could definitely tell that there were some notes taken between Dune 1 and Dune 2. But for the most part, I thought it was pretty cohesive.
So how do you feel about, I mean, you mentioned that you're excited or more open for Dune Messiah. I know there's also an HBO Max prequel series that is going to be coming out. Like obviously this is a world and a franchise we are expanding on past even just having a third film. How invested do you feel about like going to Arrakis and really digging into all these stories? Like do you think this is exciting for you? Are you like dreading this? Like what are your thoughts there?
Let me start with the HBO Max series. I could give a fuck less. I will not be watching. I will not even give it a chance. I could not care less about, as you mentioned, the Dune mythology. My investment is purely in the story of this mainline story of Paul and Chani and all of that. Whatever that Dune the Sisterhood series is, which I assume is just going to be a bunch of like convoluted Benny Gesserit lore, but on a TV budget. So they're just going to have like 3 rooms, and they're all just going to sit around and whisper and blah blah blah. Not a shred of interest, not an iota of interest. Although I will say that that's not unique to Dune. I have decided over the last year that I'm not going to watch any streaming series that are expansions of cinematic universes, regardless of what they are, just on principle.
Book of Boba Fett didn't do it for you?
Book of
Come on.
The last one I watched and where I truly jumped off the train was Secret Invasion. I was watching the second episode of that and I was like, this is gobbledygook. I just like don't care. Because if it's on streaming, it's just there to fill a certain void and a content void. And it's not actually essential because it's not practical to make movies that follow up a streaming series because you just can't guarantee that people watch it. Like that's the issue that Marvel's had and like all these brands have had. And I'm curious to see how James Gunn will deal with it with DC. But
I realized that when watching WandaVision made Doctor Strange 2 worse, I was like, oh, maybe I just shouldn't watch these. And then I went through this time with I gave up on Star Wars because I don't know what the fuck is, like, I don't get it, I
yeah,
don't care. But Marvel, I've done this thing where I'm like, I will get sent like the first few episodes early and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to review these. And then I get like halfway through the first episode and this happened with Secret Invasion. And I'm like, maybe I'm not going to review these. And I just
yeah.
turn them off and never think about them again.
There's nothing to review. They just sit there and recite the like there are some that are less egregious than others. I hate Peacemaker for political reasons, but I think that like the on principle, like something like Peacemaker makes sense where you're just like, oh, we're just gonna have a side story with this one character that was like in this movie and you can see his development and yada yada. But like with the Marvel shows, and this is what I feel like Dune the Sisterhood is gonna feel like, it's just like a lore dump. They all just stand around being like, remember when this happened in the Avengers. Remember when this happened in Avengers Endgame. I hear that Kang is coming. Well, not anymore.
No, they'll
but
say that still. And you're like, well,
well,
that's not happening. So
um,
like, why am I watching this?
but so as far as that goes, I don't care. But the Dune Messiah, I am very excited to see, and I do. Denis is scaring me a little because he's saying he's going to make something in between Dune 2 and Dune Messiah, which was very welcome to me before I saw Dune 2. But now that I have, I honestly kind of just want him to finish this thing up and like not have a weird one in between. And he like, I think the main thing with Dune 2 that I take away from it was that in the first one, I'm aware that he was passionate about the story because he talked about it, but the actual execution of it, I don't think translated that passion in any real way. This one, I truly feel that he loves this world and that he cares about it and that he has a vision and he wants to see this thing through. So I am very, very excited to see what happens in the next one. I'm eager to see it, especially since it sounds like it's going to go in a really twisted kind of dark direction that kind of subverts the expectation of like the rousing like Return of the King, like, oh, it's like the good guys like banding together for one last battle. It sounds like you're gonna end the third one and be like, oh fuck, the world sucks. So I am excited for the third one. I do have I have a weird feeling, and I can't really put my finger on why. I think this one, Dune 2, will be the best of the three. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just have a weird feeling that this is the one where they really like kicked it into gear and like had their shit together. I think the third one might get a little lost in the sauce. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll be the best. But that's my prediction there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I already like the first Dune better than this one, so that's not going to be true for me. But I think for the majority of people, you're probably right. What I do know about Dune is that even though I've not read the books, I have had like bits and pieces spoiled. I know it gets very weird, so I'm interested to see how some things I've heard about that are coming are translated onto the big screen. I will say I have this like no one's everyone like, and they did this with Dune Part Two, where I'm like, everyone is like, oh, we're gonna end this with Dune Messiah, and it's like, well, that's book two. There's 6 books. If he really like is in love with this and doing well financially, I am like worried we're gonna get Dune 4, Dune 5, Dune 6. Like I'm worried that this is not gonna end, but I am happy that he's making a film in between. I mean, that's how we got Nolan's Inception, which I really enjoyed. So like I'm hoping like that's the biggest part for me. If like Denis wants to continue making these, good for him. I just want other films because I really like him as a director, and I don't really love any of the Dune films. So I'm like, well, let's at least do the other stuff alongside it. But I do agree with you that I think most people will probably like Dune Part Two the most, and then it'll probably, well, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, trying to review a movie that doesn't even exist right now. So, hard to do. But I do think it is interesting where it goes. And I'm excited just to see like some of the weird concepts. I agree. I probably will not watch whatever goes on Max. I don't really watch a lot of TV anyway, and I don't really care about Dune or the Dune mythology. And I assume it will just be worse than Dune. So why would I
Yeah.
watch it? But who knows? I mean, I guess we're still making Max a thing. I feel like though we've kind of stopped. Like, the Penguin will come out, and I won't watch it, but everyone will like it. And then like you have the Dune series. And then I don't know, is Max even doing anything? I feel like we've just kind of given up on it. So it feels like these are the last few things that are really gonna like try. But
They've got
we'll
that
see.
show starting tonight, The Regime, with Kate Winslet. That's like a succession-y thing that I hear is pretty good.
Can't say I'll
Um,
probably be watching it, but maybe.
but
I mean, let's be clear. We have Julia. Julia will still be getting me to
yeah,
tune in.
it's
Um,
done. It's done. It got canceled.
it got canceled.
Julia's canceled.
God damn it! This is my Batgirl.
Oh man. I do want to jump on one of the points that you made, which is that my favorite Denis movie is Prisoners. And I would really love to see him go back to that more grounded thriller style. So I think he's great at that, and I think he's kind of become this very kind of, I hate to compare it, but like a very kind of like a James Cameron or a Christopher Nolan, who like every movie it has to be a fucking like big blowout sci-fi like special effects extravaganza, and like you said, like good for him if that's what he likes to do. But I miss that side of him. I miss that like darker, more street level human side, and I do hope,
Yeah,
because the movies that he's making allegedly between Dune 2 and Dune Messiah are, as I understand them, all big movies. Like Cleopatra, that's going to be like a historical epic.
sure.
A Rendezvous with Rama, I think it's called, I think is a sci-fi book, as I understand it. Um, and then he has a secret project, which I hope is a thriller, but probably won't be.
Even
And
Arrival is pretty small in scale, even though
oh
there's
yeah,
obviously sci-fi elements. Like, but I agree, Prisoners is my number two. I have such a soft spot for Blade Runner that puts it number one. But like, Sicario, I love.
hmm
That's like one of my first films I saw. Like, that really got me into films. Like, I just love his smaller work. I agree, and it's just like, I just don't want to lose that in the Dune scale size stuff.
yeah,
But maybe that's
definitely.
just nature, you
And
know?
I love Blade Runner and Arrival too. I'd say my top three are probably Prisoners, Arrival, Blade Runner.
Exact same for me. Though I've not seen Enemy. I've heard Enemy's great, but I've not seen it
Enemy is
yet.
okay. Gets Enemy gets a is starts out really strong, and then the ending is really dumb.
I'm gonna be honest, I have arachnophobia, and that's why I've not watched it
Oh
because I've
well, yeah.
seen a scene. Yeah,
Don't watch
I've seen a
Spaceman
big
either.
spider. Oh wait, no, really?
Spaceman, yeah, the whole movie. I mean, for
No.
one thing, it's one of the worst movies I've
Wow.
ever seen, and the other thing
Yeah.
is it's a 90-minute one act play with Adam Sandler talking to a giant spider, and they
I didn't
become
know the
like best
spider
friends.
part.
They become best buddies, and the
I was gonna
spiders.
watch it tonight.
No,
No.
don't do it. It's the worst. Like it's utterly miserable.
It's so sad. I almost saw that film like 3 years ago at a press screening or like an early screening, and I was like, this will just come out this year. Like, I don't need,
Oh
I just
man,
skipped it and it just never came out. And then it just got dropped, buried on Netflix. And I was
as
like,
it
oh,
should
that's not
be.
a good sign. That's not promising.
As it should
Um,
be.
that sucks. Well, anyway, I mean, that's sad. At least, Dune 2, I think we both agree was good. You liked it more than me. And I'm happy that people are loving it. I love when people love cinema and want to go support it and want to go specifically see it on the big screen. So I think that is wonderful that this film is doing good and is doing that. I'm shocked that like so many young like teenagers are getting into this considering the lore, but like good on them, right? If they want to go do that pre Star Wars prequel stuff, go do it, Phantom Menace is coming back to theaters. Maybe that's going to be reevaluated now. Um, yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on Dune Part Two?
You kind of said it. I think it really speaks to this kind of auteur driven blockbuster that we're seeing kind of rise in the death of the superhero movie, where people want something that is made by human hands, has a real vision, has actors they like, a director that they like, and is something that'll give you your money's worth and not just be something that's like you mentioned before, like, oh, the next one will be good. And honestly, that's why I think the first Dune did well at the time that it did, because that was when kind of Marvel was king and people were used to that kind of movie that's very much like, this is the movie that introduces you to stuff, but the next one, that's going to be the crazy one. I don't think that movie would have thrived today, but I do think that this one is arriving at the perfect moment, and I'm very happy for its success.
I will
Absolutely.
say releasing in a global pandemic where there's no other releases it does help. I'll just say
Doesn't hurt.
that.
Doesn't
Does
hurt.
not hurt. But like to be clear, I will take 5 Dune projects a year if that means we're done with superhero films. So like just to put it in context,
Definitely.
I'm happy in this timeline still, definitely can't complain that this is happening. And I'm looking at a year with no DC films. I'll take it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And only that Deadpool mess from Marvel that I hope is as bad as it sounds so that we can be
yeah.
done. So I
You
feel
and
like if
Paul better
that
both be on that because I was not going to include it on the podcast schedule. And then both of you were like, we got to watch it. We got to review it. I was like, oh, okay, we'll do it. That trailer looks bad. I'll
it's
just say
that
I thought it was
trailer,
awful.
oh my fuck. That line where, because like I like the first two Deadpools. I think they're fun movies. That bit where he goes, whatever it is, like when he's like, pegging isn't new for me, but it is for Disney. I was like, this is the most deeply cynical fucking thing, because it's literally just
Yeah.
like Deadpool. It almost feels like a movie that is a skit that's going to play on like a shareholders call, because that's like all it is. It's just Deadpool being like, which was once like a subversive, like fun thing, being like a corporate mascot almost for this like merger. And the whole movie's just going to be like, wasn't 20th Century Fox terrible? Wasn't it great that we fired all those people? Wasn't it great that like it's just going to be all that fucking
Yeah.
trash. So yeah, that'll be a fun episode for sure. But hopefully, I don't usually like to root against movies, but I really hope that movie fails, because if that fails, the
Yeah.
wheels are off. But if it
Thank
succeeds, the wheels are back on.
thank God. I will do whatever it takes to go to an early screening of that so I can avoid teenagers in the crowd going,
Oh
"Oh my
Christ!
God, he said fuck. That's so funny."
Well, it's
It
going to
is
be No
not,
Way
yeah.
Home again, but like way worse, because it's going to be just like a cameo fest. But it's going to be all the
Mhm.
like, it's going to be the audience that is all just people who just say the early 2000s,
Yeah.
just like about everything, are just going to be going fucking ape shit, because it's going to be 55. It's going to be the movie people thought Multiverse of Madness was going to be. They learned
Yeah.
from their mistake, where it's just going to be like, and here's this guy from 2005, and here's this guy from 2003, and here's this guy, and it's just going to be like Deadpool reading the
Yeah.
Rotten Tomato scores of all the old movies. Like it's going to be terrible, but
Yeah.
it'll be a great episode for sure.
And as I did with No Way Home, I'll sit in my empty press screening with 2 other people, and it will
As
be
you
silence
should.
during those scenes. And then it will also be good. I will laugh though at the empty silence that they put so audiences can laugh, and there's just no one laughing or cheering in my room. So I'm like, that's great.
That sounds like
That's
heaven.
entertaining. You can also, I did to get with Captain Marvel or with the Marvels at the end credit scene, but you could have just gone to a public screening for that because no one was there anyway.
Amen, brother.
Though I did like the Marvels, sadly, but alas. So if you want to see Dune Part 2, it's in theaters now. It will probably be on Max in a month or two. Um, they've been trying to do some longer theatrical
They said by
like
summer it's going to be
calendars.
on Max.
Yeah, so I assume in like June or whatever. But definitely I would recommend, if you're going to see it, if you can, go in the theater. It's one of those films where like I could not imagine watching this at home. Just go watch it in like IMAX and you'll be great. So now for our question of the week, we're asking, what is your favorite second film in a trilogy? Or favorite sequel, however you want to go about it. Paul was like, let's do this other one. And then Paul didn't show up to the podcast because he didn't watch Dune Part 2, per usual. So however you want to take it is fine with me. I will go first because I almost guarantee you're not going to pick the one I'm picking. I'm going Night at the Museum to Battle of the Smithsonian. Of course, me and Alina Falls, I know, both stand this film. Incredibly fun. Amy Adams plays Amelia Earhart. You have Napoleon, Al Capone, and Ivan the Terrible chasing down Ben Stiller in the Smithsonian with a giant octopus. It fucking rules. I love this film. It was like growing up, this was like my favorite film as a child, and still watching it now, it just slaps. Love Night at the Museum 2. Number 3 is not good, but number 1's good, but number 2 is where it's at. So that's my pick. Michael, what is your answer?
It's so funny because I did see that movie, but I couldn't tell you a thing. I remember Jonah Hill being in the beginning, and then
Funniest Jonah Hill performance of all time.
Earhart is, no, sorry, Amy Adams is Amelia Earhart. I wish it was Amelia Earhart as Amy Adams.
Saturday, come over to Paul's. We'll get high and we'll watch
I absolutely, I would love that. The only one I really remember is the first one. You know what I'm going to say. My favorite movie ever is Magic Mike Double XL, which is now the second in a trilogy. And I mean, I've talked about that at length on this podcast. The most joyful American film to open in my lifetime. And then I would say probably my second would be The Dark Knight. And we don't need to go into why. We've all seen that film.
We've all seen it. We've all talked about it. We all get it. That's a good answer. I like that series have been brought up twice today. And maybe one day Dune Part 2 might be someone's answer. So that's fun.
I think it probably will be. I'm definitely feeling like it's a Dark Knight moment in terms of just like the broader culture. It feels like it. It feels like it. It definitely, like the way people are reacting and like how many times people are going. It does feel similar. It's not as much money, but it'll get there probably.
I'm sure Across the Spider-Verse is also plenty of people's answers.
Yeah,
good on them.
For some reason, the brain rot.
Yeah, I guess we're just doing this every year. We're gonna pick a film like this, and it's gonna be our favorite film of all time, which is valid. I guess. I mean, I'll take this over like Power of the Dog. So,
I mean,
that's good.
We have to forget that movie exists unless you're bringing it up on an episode of ClapperCast,
which happens weekly. If you have your bingo cards, you can fill that out now. But I do mention that pretty much every time. With that, I think that's going to do it. Let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything, Michael, we've seen recently that we want to talk about? I will go first just because I have a couple things. We're doing a John Waters special on Patreon this month, so I've been checking out a lot of his films. I really thought Crybaby was super fun, starring Johnny Depp, who I don't like, but in this like Elvis parody, I thought he was very, very fun in this film, and just overall one of Waters' most fun films. And then I also rewatched Ready Player One. Don't really know why, but I did. And on release, I thought it was very fun. Watching it now, I was definitely like, oh, it's not good. We were having a fun in 2018. What can I say? It was a more innocent time. And now that we've been through a global pandemic, now that everything's hit, life, I've grown up. I just looked and I said, well, I like the Shining bit and I don't really like anything else. But, valid. Shout out Steven Spielberg. So those would be my rapid reviews. Michael, have you seen anything recently you'd like to talk about?
I've watched a few things recently. Like I just mentioned, I watched Spaceman with Adam Sandler, which was atrocious. Don't go anywhere near that film. I think Netflix might be the worst movie studio in history. After Spaceman, I needed an Adam Sandler palate cleanser. So actually yesterday I just watched Happy Gilmore, which I haven't seen in a very long time. And I meant to watch it right after Carl Weathers died, but I didn't get around to it. So I just watched it. And I was surprised actually by how well it held up. For the most part, I think it's super funny, and I think that Adam Sandler actually has been a great actor the whole time. He does a really deceptive amount of acting in that movie because it's such a weird kind of angry character to kind of get on the side of. And the way that, the absurdity of those movies is really well managed, I think. And I was surprised by that, and it actually made me want to revisit a bunch of his older movies. And then a movie that I saw recently that I absolutely loved was Lisa Frankenstein. Even after Dune, that's still my favorite movie of the year. I don't care. Just so funny, so twisted, great performances, so stylish. Um, just a blast. That's in my permanent spooky season rotation now. And personally, I think it's the better of Diablo Cody's two horror movies. I think it's better than Jennifer's Body by a lot. I know that's a hot take, but it'll age well.
I loved it. I thought it was so fun. I'm so happy actually kind of Paul's not here to shit on it, but like, because I
Uh,
know he like despises the film. I thought it was so fun. I went in expecting like nothing. And I'm really not trying to go to like movies that much. Like I just am so over new releases. I'm really trying just to like break the addiction and only see what I want to see. But I was like, oh, it looks fun enough. I'm just gonna go, whatever, and like really enjoyed it. Happy I went to see it.
yeah, we were the only
Yeah.
two, apparently.
Only two. But you know what? I'm definitely, I think out of every release that's like actually been released, not kind of like film festival stuff, I think it's my favorite of the year also right now. So
Yeah,
would recommend, as it plays probably in one screening in your theater
right.
a day at probably 10:30 p.m.
It's on
Would
digital now.
recommend you go see it. Oh, it is on digital. Well, go check it out on digital. With that, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you, Michael, so much for coming on. Where can we find you on social media? Because I know you've had some updates over the last few weeks.
Yes, I'm no longer a TikToker. Very happy to be free. I just, it's over, it's done. I'm not a video creator anymore. However, you can find my reviews on Letterboxd. You can follow me on Twitter, and I will have an announcement very soon about my next major project.
Exciting stuff. Exciting stuff. You can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterbox and Blue Sky, just Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you so much coming on and joining us to talk about all these releases. We'll be back later this month for a John Waters double feature. And then we're reviewing Grave of the Fireflies, which is going to be a very fun and positive episode, I am sure. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.